let's get into it. CWD, 12 confirmed positives. That's where we are after the deer season as far as the major samplings going on, as far as that's concerned. Surprised, delighted, okay. I mean, is this good news? Is this bad news? I guess considering what Tennessee's showing right now, it's good news for Mississippi.
Yeah, and I think it will probably continue to evolve up there in North Mississippi. With what they got going on up there, it just looks kind of unfortunate, kind of messy. So we'll just have to wait and see. We've discussed some things, in-house about how to further progress next year with deer season and trying to simplify some things and trying to get everybody on the same page so we can better manage that resource and try to figure out a little bit more about the disease. So, I think it was a good, successful season as far as sampling. I think I checked this morning. It was like over 7,300
Yeah, that's
samples.
the number I saw, which is unbelievable. Thank you, hunters.
That's a lot.
Thank you, hunters.
If it wasn't for our routine sampling that was in place, Tennessee probably wouldn't even know what they have right now.
Right. They just started sampling due to the fact that we caught some positives up there close to them, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and same thing, Louisiana, they kind of started doing a little bit of sampling. Yeah, So just in comparison, I think Louisiana didn't even get 1,000 samples this year, right?
Right.
Well,
Wow.
we exceeded our goals. I think we were hoping for about 5,000 samples statewide. And
almost 2,500 above that.
It's like 7,200, 7,300 so far.
Well, I think it's cool that the hunters stepped up and did their part.
Obviously did.
Wouldn't have happened without them. Absolutely would not have happened without them.
I get that, and I think they deserve a lot of credit, and I think y'all deserve a lot of credit as well for doing everything we can do to stay on top of this. That we could do everything we could do to stay on top of this. Now, there is maybe a possible understanding for a better understanding of this disease. I believe there is a doctor at LSU, a neuropathologist, Dr. Frank Bastian, who is now suggesting that maybe CWD could be caused by a bacteria. Now, I know none of us in this room are pathologists or anywhere close to being or neuropathologists.
You got to be really smart for that.
Nobody even remotely close to being that. I understand that.
I don't even know what that entails.
But this is a possible breakthrough. We don't know. Don't know if it's credible or not. I don't believe prions are completely out of the equation here, but talking about this maybe possibly a bacteria.
Sure, and we wanted to bring it up today because it seems like over the last week or so there's been a lot of internet and social media attention on it. In fact, Chip just this morning on the webcast of the show here got a question from a viewer that's watching the radio show right now. So there's a lot of people talking about it, and we at MDWFP are certainly aware of it. A lot of other state wildlife agencies are aware of it. You're exactly right, though, JT, that I think being a neuropathologist, that's above and beyond our credentials here. But he does pose some interesting stuff, and I guess the synopsis of it would be that he believes he's discovered a bacteria that is actually, of my understanding, is actually causing the misfolding of the prion. So the prion is still involved, and the whole community around CWD for quite a while now has not really understood kind of
that's been a mystery all along.
Right. What initially causes the protein, the prion, to misfold and then continue to replicate itself? Like, we've never really known that. So this gentleman is saying that he has sort of found a bacteria that causes that, and also links it to several other similar neurological diseases like the scrapie in sheep and Crutchfield-Jacobs in humans and different things. So if he's on to something there, it would be revolutionary. I mean, it would be Nobel Prize winning type science. So we're watching it. We're definitely watching it.
I'm going to pursue this man and see if I can possibly get him on my show maybe this week or next week, because this could be interesting, could be revolutionary, but it's going to take some time. We don't know if he's right. He's got a theory out there right now, and that's what scientists do. I mean, that's how they operate. And
that's right. My understanding, I think, is that he's been able to grow that bacteria in the laboratory and maybe infect some individuals with it. So the one thing, if it is caused by a bacteria, that means theoretically you should be able to come up with something that can kill it. Bacteria can be killed.
Is going to be dealing with it in a wild population.
That's right.
Sure.
Yeah.
It is Predator and Habitat Management Month, and we're going to talk about predators and trapping. And Adam, it's really important that predators are controlled in shaping the population of game animals. And as we've learned, the best possible way, and this goes for hogs and everything else, as we've learned, is if you're wanting to deal with predators and try to reduce them, trapping is the most efficient way to go about doing that.
Well, it depends. It depends. So predators, JT, in some ways get a bad rap. In other ways, it is deserved. They are exceedingly complex to understand. Like there are a lot of researchers and scientists out there that make entire careers trying to study the relationship between predators and their prey and all of that. And so I think a lot of when folks with our agency or you hear a wildlife biologist talking about predation, a lot of times I think hunters misunderstand what we say in a lot of cases, where they think we come out and say that predators don't matter or predators are not having an impact on game species, and that's just absolutely not the case. There's no turkeys that die quietly in their sleep because of old age. There's no deer that just live to be 15 and just die of old age. That just doesn't happen in the wild. So predators are absolutely critical in shaping populations of most of the game species or most all wildlife species. There's the whole food web out there. So the issue, I think, really depends on what can you do about it and where does trapping play into that, and when is trapping effective and when is it not. So bottom line is that predation is ultimately what drives most wildlife populations, and it affects it in different ways. So predators are something to think about. They are part of the equation, and that's why we're talking about them in Predator Habitat Month.
Well, predator populations closely mimic the populations of the prey that they live on, whether that's game animals or non-game animals. And for most predators, they absolutely do and will prey upon some of these game species, non-game species as well. And the fact is that, some of that cycle has a little bit of a lag time as game and as prey populations begin to increase, predator populations begin to increase behind them. There becomes a point when your prey species reach that point that the habitat can no longer support, and they start to drop off. The predators can be at that apex for a little while. There may be a little lag. But that being said, there is opportunity within our laws and regulations for people to get out there and do things to manage that predator population. And so you can do that through hunting, you can do that through trapping. For the most part, these predatory animals that people consider the most of interest are usually bobcat, coyotes, and fox.
Right.
And then other folks consider other things like what we call the nest predators for turkeys and other ground nesting birds, raccoons and possums and skunks. So there is opportunity for you to get in there and do some things to control them numbers. And I think there is some information out there that shows that an increased amount of harvest there can start to show some opportunities for those game animals to rebound at an exaggerated level compared to without trapping or without control. And so, but like you say, the misnomer is out there that coyotes are the problem with deer populations, or that raccoons are the problem with turkey populations. That is not the case. They can definitely have an impact. Obviously, coyotes, if you are as old as someone like me and JT, you remember back in the 70s when coyotes did not occupy every county in the state. That is not the case anymore. They obviously are widespread, and in some places they can have some detrimental effects. The problem with things like coyotes is their home range is so expansive. People think that they can control a coyote population on a 40-acre block. You will not do that. Coyotes' home ranges can exceed 25 square miles. So unless you're going to get all of your neighbors and their neighbors involved, you're probably not going to have a significant impact. But you still can work with what you have right there on your property.
Obviously, promoting the trapping of predators to help with populations, to help wildlife populations out, is that something that is necessarily something that's going to work? That's the question. And I guess it just all depends, right?
Right. And so, again, I go back to there's been a lot of science on this across the board. Whether you look at, coyotes and deer, there's been, over the last decade or so, there's been a lot of research on the impact coyotes have on deer. Going back for 20 or 30 years, there's been you take waterfowl, for instance, a lot of research up on the prairie pothole in the nesting area where the ducks nest, and looking at the impact of predator removal. Where I did my master's research down at Tall Timbers Research Station in South Georgia and Florida, they've looked at the relationship between nest predators and quail. And the answer really is that it depends. That, number one, if you're doing any kind of trapping or predator control without having good habitat, you're probably wasting time. That you got to have the habitat right to kind of tee everything up. And then, once you do that, you can move on down the list. So you think of it as like a bucket. It's got holes in it. If you're trying to fill that bucket up with water, you start filling the holes at the bottom first. And so habitat is that. And then what a lot of the science shows is that sometimes predator trapping works, sometimes it doesn't. It's dictated by a lot of things, environmental factors, weather, lots of stuff like that. But across the board, if you're doing it over a large enough area, you can have an impact. But again, like Ricky said, you can't just do it on the back 40 and expect to see more deer, turkeys, whatever. It's got to be done across a large area. And that's the one thing that is pretty consistent across all the research, that we're talking large scale, pretty intensive, and that's just beyond the capacity of a lot of hunters and landowners and hunting clubs to impact something that large.
And one of our big messages that we always like to harp on as biologists is work with the habitat first. And that is the limiting factor. And, you can talk about predators and predation and the numbers of wildlife species and those populations, how they look on your property. You can also compare this same type of thing to the same argument about supplemental feeding and what's its effect, and can you just supplemental feed? And no, you cannot. You have to work with the habitat. And so if you're trying to produce deer, and all you have is wide open, expansive, mature hardwoods, and you have nothing else to provide to their needs, and you've got predators, then predators is not your problem. Right. Same thing with turkeys. If all you have is 5, 6, 8-year-old pine plantations, and you're trying to produce turkeys, that's your limiting factor there. So that's a good point. It is something that can be a tool. It is not the answer to your problems.
I think we could all agree, though, trapping is the most effective way for dealing with hogs, huh?
You can be very efficient with your time as far as removing numbers. You can go out there and recreational hunt and have some fun with predator hunting and things like that, but the best bang for your buck is someone who is skilled, and I go back to someone who's skilled with trapping. If you just go out there and start setting traps, it's kind of like we talk about people dealing with wild hogs on their property. It's not just setting the trap. It is setting the trap effectively and the way it's supposed to be, and learning all those creative things that make you effective. So a trapper can get out there and with a dozen or two traps in very short order, can set traps, walk away from them, come back and check them every day, every other day, and can remove quite a few individuals over a short period of time. There are some people out there that are very skilled at it, and it works.
I think one difference, like you bring up, Ricky, that between hogs and other things, one reason why trapping can be so effective with hogs is because you're generally going to catch the whole bunch of them at once. You're going to catch 8 or 10 or 12 or whatever at one time, whereas if we're talking raccoons, you're just one at a time in it, Difference in scale there and what you can do.
And February is a good month to be doing it. We're talking about trapping, so we might as well talk a little bit about regulations and how the trapping season works. So the trapping season is designed to provide opportunity during the time that pelts are prime for the fur industry. So that's where the trapping season has been centered. And so the trapping season opens up in Mississippi on November 1st. It closes on March 15th. Now, you have a year like looks like we're going to have right now with a warmer February. We've had a fairly warm January, and no telling what March will look like. There'll still be trapping opportunity for folks to get out there through March 15th, but it is very likely that some of these species will not necessarily be prime much past the end of February, but we'll see.
Why is that?
Well, a lot of that has to do with their response
coat.
to the thick coat, to the weather, and that whole thing is what drives the value of fur or pelts. And the value of most species in Mississippi do not compare well to species up in the northern part of the United States. For instance, a western or northwestern bobcat pelt can average over $400 a piece.
Come on,
in their prime. But in the South, in Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, they may only average about $45.
Do they just have more speckling, more spots?
Yeah, for the western cats, it really has more to do with their markings, the spots and things, but it also does have to do with the denseness of the fur. And you see more of the denseness issues with things like beaver and raccoons, where that is a trading point. They've got to have that good dense undercoat and good primeness. A northern United States beaver could average about $35 a piece, whereas here in the South, and particularly Mississippi, may be $5 to $8.
Got a question: is a nutria? Is it a market for that in the state? Not really, but that's what they thought it was going to be. Wasn't it?
Yeah, the history of the nutria, that is an exotic species. It's not native to North America. It was brought here to from South America in the 1930s. Actually started out in the area around New Iberia, Louisiana, as a farm. A big hurricane hit in the 1930s. The nutria were released and escaped, and from there, nutria populations have expanded everywhere. But
now they're just feeding your alligators, huh?
Now they're feeding alligators, and they're eating all of our native aquatic plants, and they are classified as a nuisance species. You can take them year-round. There is very little to no market for their fur now. You're lucky if you can get 25, 50 cents a piece for them.
Some folks say you can eat them, but I'm not going to.
I've ate them. I've had nutria sausage. I've had nutria sausage po' boys. It's not too bad.
Not too bad.
What does it taste like?
Chicken.
Nah.
Tastes
what everything tastes like.
It's different. It's different. I don't prefer it. I'll say that up front.
Turkey will gobble out a nutria rat.
Are snares legal?
Yep.
Snares are legal. Mississippi has some of the most open trapping regulations anywhere in the country, and you can go to our website and look at all those regulations. We probably don't have time to go over all that now, but what I would like to talk about is how the value of trappers has changed over the last few decades. Trapping, you go way back in history, trapping actually helped discover this nation. It was the fur trade that pushed people west.
Mountain men
out west. You ever watch the movie Revenant? Go watch the movie The Revenant, and it'll tell you all about it.
We watched Jeremiah Johnson at the Butler House not that long ago.
Revenant's just the modern day Jeremiah Johnson. But because of the drop in the fur market, and the fur market is very complicated. Fur demand right now is mostly driven by China and Russia and different products that happen there, and there's a whole lot that goes on politically that has changed some things. For instance, you go back into the early 2000s when the market for otter pelts had gotten really high. People were selling otter pelts in Mississippi for as much as $200 a piece, and all of a sudden some fur dealers in China got in some trouble with their government, and the government put them in jail.
You don't want to get in trouble with the Chinese government.
No, and when those few buyers got put in the pokey, the market went away, and so a few people can drive a huge product like that anywhere in the world. And so now, with the drop in the value of fur for the garment industry, we've seen more push going towards the commercial end of it. And we're talking about predator control. If a landowner, is really interested in doing some extensive predator control, this is not something that you're going to learn overnight. And the value of a trapper, someone who has those types of skills, is something that people are willing to pay for. And so a lot of these people who have these trapping skills are using that opportunity to make a second income, working for landowners, whether it's predators, beaver, wild hog trapping, you name it. And so there's also a certain amount of the industry that's working with nuisance wildlife in these suburban areas. That is becoming more and more of an issue all across this country. Wildlife agencies deal with nuisance wildlife probably more than anything else we deal with. And that's from squirrels and raccoons getting in your attic, bats, geese, you name it, whatever species there are out there. When we encroach on their habitats, they become a problem.
Well, we're talking about it, and of course it is national. It is predator and trapping. I don't know where I got the national from there, but that's what we're talking about today. Predator and Habitat Management Month, and so important for us to do some things that we can do. All right, you got this fur auction around the corner.
Yeah, it's a great time to talk about that. The Mississippi Trappers Association is one of the longest stakeholding trappers associations in the country, and they have been performing their fur auction annually in Kosciuszko, Mississippi for, I don't know, at least 50, 60 years now. And Chip Davis is the Mississippi Trappers Association president, and he's been just gotten involved as a president there and has done a great amount of work, working extremely well with the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, and we're making some leaps and bounds as far as educating people and educating public, working cooperatively together. And the Trappers Association puts on this auction every year for the benefit of Mississippi fur trappers. And it brings in enough volume of fur that there are fur buyers who will come to Kosciuszko, Mississippi from all areas of the country. We've got people that come as far away as Wisconsin, Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama, Pennsylvania in some cases, have all come there to basically auction off and buy Mississippi fur. And it's a great opportunity for Mississippi trappers to get involved with that Trappers Association. If you will get your membership with them, you can submit your fur into the sale. I think basically for free. There's a little bit of a commission that goes back to the Trappers Association to pay for their costs, but it's a great thing there. Mississippi Trappers Association has a website that is up, new and running, and has a lot of good, helpful information. They've got some YouTube demo videos on there that can be very helpful, and we encourage people to go out there and see that. And I always give the invitation to our staff to come and help us man our responsibilities there at that fur sale. And if you've never been to the fur sale and experienced what that looks like, it's something everybody who's
How many
involved
people? How many total people will be there?
There'd be a couple hundred people there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Here's something that that we were talking about a little bit earlier, and it was at the beginning of the show from the C-Spire text line. JT, is there any truth to the video out there circulating on Facebook about a cure for CWD out of LSU? Well, what we're talking about and what we were talking about, and I presume what he is talking about, is Dr. Frank Bastian, a neuropathologist at LSU, suggesting that CWD could be caused by a bacteria that are causing these prions to be unfolded. Right. We don't know if that's the case or not. This is something very new.
It's not been replicated. He is on a pretty good theory, though, and that's not to say that in and of itself is a cure. Basically, the way to think of it would be he has possibly uncovered the mechanism that is causing the prions to be misfolded, and if it is a bacteria, then a cure would be out there. It's not to that point yet, but if it's a bacteria, we can kill it.
Yeah, I think it's being represented as there's a cure because he's identified it as a bacteria,
right?
And common science tells you that there is a cure for a bacteria. There is no mechanism for the cure yet,
right? Yeah.
But this whole CWD thing, there is so much that is unknown, and that has been the biggest problem about CWD is what we don't know. And if this information is indeed true, it's going to be huge into furthering more science to try and develop more information, possibly a cure. If you're talking about a cure on a widespread scale to a wild population, that's going to be quite a deal. You're talking about, in some states, hundreds, thousands of square miles of area that's affected by CWD. But if you're looking at enclosures, farm-raised deer, farm-raised cervids, certainly that's something that's more manageable. But the bottom line is it's new information. There is not a cure yet. It's just new, good information that's going to be very effective.
And the real interesting thing, the stuff that I read of it, was that he thinks this same bacteria is also playing into these other closely related diseases, like scrapie in sheep and the Crutchfield-Jacobs, whichever, in humans, possibly even in Alzheimer's. So, man, if he's on something with all of that, literally, that's probably Nobel Prize winning type stuff.
Yep. And all this type of knowledge always births something else. And boy, if something from this comes forward to be a help with Alzheimer's, it could be huge. So getting back to the first sale in Kosciuszko, Mississippi, I do want to plug for anybody who's interested in going to that. It will be this Saturday at the Kosciuszko Coliseum. The auction itself should start around 10 a.m. and will probably go past lunchtime. Most years it goes to probably 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, depending on the amount of volume of fur that is brought in. And there is some expectation that maybe there's been a little bit of an uptick in the value for pelts this year here just in the last few weeks, possibly.
What would have driven that?
I don't know yet. I hadn't heard any specifics. I've just kind of getting this information secondhand through some fur buyers who are involved in the industry and talking about that, and maybe could result in some improved markets for next year. So if you're interested in getting with the Mississippi Trappers Association, again, you can contact Chip Davis. I can get out of his phone number if you want to call him today. It's 662-515-6802. That's 662-515-6802. And he'll be glad to answer your questions and give you some more information about the association. And go to their website at mstrappers.com. That's www.mstrappers.com.